So the USSR, they industrialized, and then around the world they had the slogan that class against class, and they had the slogan that anyone, that the Communist Party was the main force for good in the world, and that all socialists who were not affiliated with the Communist Party were actually secret fascists, and they were called social fascists.
Fascists, yes.
So the Socialist Party of the U.S. was actually a fascist party. And the Trotskyist parties around the world, the people who were in the left opposition, who had left the communist parties, they were secret fascists as well. And the Farmers' Labor Party...
I knew that was what Trump was.
Right, and the Farmer Labor Party, they were secret fascists. And,
yes.
And everyone was a secret fascist if they weren't in the Communist Party. So as a result, in Hitler's Germany, the Communist Party and the Socialist Party were the main forces of opposition to Hitler. But they didn't go together because they'd been told that the Nazis and the Socialists were both fascists. And so they were divided, and the Communist Party devoted most of its efforts to attacking the Socialists and exposing them as real fascists, while Hitler was actually a fascist and was coming into power.
Yeah.
And in the U.S. even, well, the worst part, in Germany, the Nazis would violently break up Socialist Party meetings. But a lot of times the Nazis would come too late because the Communist Party had broken it up before they got there. It was a divisive period, and the slogan "class against class" meant that if you weren't affiliated with the Communist International, you were actually a social fascist, and that had such a divisive effect on the international communist movement.
It really did. I know.
Oh,
I know that Ted was called a social fascist.
That's her husband.
Because he belonged to the Farmer Labor Party, and in the 1920s.
Oh wow!
And in Minnesota, he knew that he wasn't a fascist. Or didn't have any kind of fascist leanings, it really disoriented the world movement.
Well, and the trade union movement in the U.S., they split the trade union movement. The communists would only join communist-led unions, because all other unions were fascist unions, supposedly.
Yes.
So, in places where there would be a miners' strike in the U.S., they would... there would be the communist miners would go on strike, and then they would not just have to fight then the bosses, they would also have to fight the other miners' union, which they were accusing of being fascist, and so that caused a lot of problems as well. But so the USSR, now at the point when Hitler came to power in Germany, at that point the USSR recognized, because Hitler had sworn, even back to Mein Kampf, long before he came to power, that his mission was to rid the world of Bolshevism. And that communism was the most evil thing. He said communism is a plot by the Jews to secretly control the world, and that Hitler was going to rid the world of Bolshevism. And Hitler, when he came to power, he went and visited the Pope and asked the Pope to sponsor and call all the Catholics around the world to have a world crusade against the Soviet Union.
The godless communists.
Right.
Yes.
Hitler came into office, and fascism as a system. When he came in, he smashed the trade unions, smashed the communists. Jews were made into second-class citizens, eventually put into concentration camps and gassed. Millions died, the Holocaust. And furthermore, it was, fascism was a real menace. And in response, the Soviet Union, they had a second five-year plan to industrialize, and the second five-year plan focused more on military power because they knew an invasion was coming from the Nazis. And they had another conference in which they called for a people's front against fascism.
Yes.
And they said that the question was no longer the workers or the bosses. The question was instead the question of all who were against fascism and all who were for fascism. So fascism was the determining question. So capitalists who were democratic were considered allies. And so the communist parties of the world formed the People's Front. In the U.S., the Communist Party aligned itself with the Roosevelt administration. In Spain, there was a fascist uprising against the Spanish Republic, and the communists joined in the government with the capitalists to fight the fascists. It was the People's Front, and instead of having these independent unions, instead they all joined the existing unions. That's it.
I want to say something about the Nazi Party.
Okay.
Okay. The word socialist and socialism was so popular that the Nazis, I mean, what does it stand for? It's a National Socialist, as distinct from the International Socialists. But the word socialist was so popular that the concept of socialism was so popular that the Nazis had to use it and distinguish themselves from the International Socialists by calling themselves National Socialists.
Right.
And that's what the term Nazi is, Nationale Sozialist. Okay? So, you know, it's in German. That Nazi is the word that is used, but it was a shortening of the form of the word National Socialist.
But they weren't in any sense socialists. They were
not
just
at all.
rebranding the name for their own use.
Right.
Yes.
And, you know...
In fact, they kept capitalism. In fact, they had tremendous monopoly capitalists.
Trying to build this world front, the people of the world, or not the people of the world, but the capitalist governments of the world were supporting Hitler underhandedly, and so they kept letting Hitler. When Hitler took over Austria, they didn't do anything. When Hitler wanted the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, they without even consulting the Czechoslovakians, the Germans, the British, the Americans, and the French signed half of Czechoslovakia over to Nazi Germany without even asking the people in Czechoslovakia. They weren't even invited to the meeting. So at that point, the Soviet government found it necessary to sign a treaty with the Nazis, dividing Europe in half and saying that that no one can go on either side. And this had happened at the time that the Soviet Union had been trying so hard to sign a treaty with the rest of Europe, but they wouldn't do it. And so
collective security.
Right, and so the Soviet government did sign the Nazi-Soviet Pact in 1939, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, I believe is that correct? And it was a temporary treaty that was signed. And one of the biggest errors was that Stalin did not inform the Soviet people about it. When Lenin had signed the treaty at Brest-Litovsk and ended Russia's involvement in World War I, he told people, he said, we shouldn't have to sign this treaty with imperialism. They're our enemies, they're filthy imperialists, but we're signing this treaty because we need them off our backs. When Hitler signed Molotov-Ribbentrop, it was just, yeah, we're signing it, and that's nice. And it wasn't an alliance; it was a treaty. Okay.
A non-aggression pact.
That they would not attack each other.
They each knew they were lying.
Right, and they knew it wasn't going to last. Supposedly, for the next 5 years, they would not attack each other, and that they divided Poland in half. And at any point, if Soviet troops or Nazi troops were not to enter the other half of the country.
So is this similar to the treaty signed between Palestine and Israel today? You're not in agreement?
Well, you could put it that way. I mean, when one country that is determined, like Israel continues to set up settlements, regardless of the treaties that they've signed. Many times when imperialists sign treaties, they intend not to. I mean, just the Native Americans. Every single treaty with the Native Americans has been broken.
Broken.
Yeah. It's just. It's kind of routine. So, finally, when the Nazis did invade the USSR, the USSR had time to prepare because of the pact. And when the Nazis did invade, they still call it the Great Patriotic War in Russia today. In June, and their intention was to finish before the Russian winter because they'd studied. But the Soviet army was so effective in pulling them back that the winter they kept them until winter. And during the 5-year plans, these workers had built these huge factories. The biggest hydropower plant in the world was in Dnipro in the USSR. But you know, when the
Dnieper.
when the Nazi army would be on the horizon, they would bomb their factories so the Nazis couldn't use it for their own ends, and they would burn their wheat fields. You know,
the scorched earth policy.
and then
what
they would do is, you know, they would surrender, but then they would have guns in the basement, or you know, guns hidden in the woodlands somewhere. So once the Nazis thought they conquered an area, they'd come and they'd be shooting them from behind, and they called it a war of the whole people. And there was guerrilla warfare, you know, and the Nazis were often being shot from one end to the other.